One thing that I find with A-level English literature, particularly early on, is that people really struggle to know what to put into an introduction. So I wanted to put this together to give you some ideas, and I've stressed there, this is ideas and thoughts. These are not kind of tips or rules. There will be intros that might break, some of the ideas that I'm saying here, but actually are very, very effective. I think it's finding a style that works for you. But if you do struggle to sort of formulate one, these are some ideas that I find help me and help some of my students. So the first thing, I think there's a few myths with introductions. The first thing I would say is actually you don't 100% need one. Often I think it does help, but no intro at all I think is better than a very bad intro. But if you can get a good, effective introduction, what it does is it lets the reader know, whether it's me, whether it's an examiner, it lets them know that they're in safe hands. There's not a set number of marks available for the intro, but it just makes whoever's marking it just sort of breathe a bit of a sigh, knowing that you know where you're going if your intro is really nicely sort of set up. What you don't want to do is sort of recount the plot. It's not about going through the plot or the characters. How you want to think of it is it's a zoomed out exploration of whatever the question's about, the topic, or concept of the question. It's looking at it in a very zoomed out way across the whole text. What is the writer appearing to say about this? The next one's slightly contentious. I spoke to a couple of colleagues and we all had slightly different views on this. I don't like I very much in introductions and in essays, okay? I like passive voice, but I know some of my colleagues don't like passive voice. So I prefer essays that say it could be argued that, or it would be tempting to suggest that, or a more convincing argument would be. I prefer that personally. Other people may disagree, and as I say, I'm not saying here that there's one way that is definitely better than others. I'm just saying that that's what I like. If you do avoid I, though, that does not mean that you avoid opinions. You still need your opinions in there. The intro, like the rest of the essay, should give an idea of what you thought. It's just that I prefer it when people don't say I believe or I think. I prefer it expressed slightly differently. You don't need to know how your essay will end, okay? Because almost if you do, well, what's the point in writing the essay? But you should be able to set out the direction. If you think of it, the intro is just sort of giving initial directions. Basically, it's not saying exactly where this essay is going to finish up, but it's setting out a bit of the direction of where it's going. So how does it go wrong? I'll tell you the ways that I've seen it go wrong. It's these 4 ways, okay? Generic intros don't tend to work. So what I mean by generic intro, it doesn't say anything. It's a waste of words like that. There are many arguments we could make about control and King Lear, and Shakespeare uses language, form and structure to make them. Well, that's not really saying anything, is it? If the question's on control, that they will know that there's lots of things you could say about control, because that's why they've set it as a question. And yes, Shakespeare does use language, form and structure, but so does every author ever. So it's just, that's kind of wasting words, really. You're better off not saying anything than having that. Another one I don't like, and there are exceptions to this, but I don't like intros that sort of back you into a corner. So what I mean by that is you basically give one clear idea or argument. The problem I find with that is that you've sort of backed yourself into a corner, and what sometimes students tend to do is just repeat that idea over and over again. So their first paragraph after the intro goes through why they think it, but then they've got nowhere else to go. They've run out of things to say. So an example would be there. Clearly the main way control is presented by Shakespeare is this something which corrupts and ultimately destroys all the characters, and the audience need to accept it as a problem. My issue with that is, okay, but there's other ways you could see control. That's not the only way you could view control, and the danger is that you've sort of closed down the debate. I have put there are exceptions. I have seen essays that do give a clear line of argument at the start and argue that as the essay goes on. So if you find that it does definitely work for you, then by all means use that. But if you're not maybe as confident with doing that, if you're not 100% confident that you could set out an idea at the start and still write a good, detailed, wide-ranging essay, then I'd say probably avoid that. The false debate, what I mean by that is it looks like a debate. At first it looks like a nice intro, but then you look at it and you think, well, actually you could say that about any text ever. So Shakespeare presents control as something which could be good or could be bad, and it's up to the audience to decide which it is as the play goes on. On the face of it, you've got a debate, is control a good or bad thing? But you replace that question with relationships or love, or change the text to any other text on the literature specification, and you could write that introduction. So again, it's a false debate. It's not a real debate. It's not really addressing that particular question. And then the other thing I'd say to avoid is zooming in. In other words, getting bogged down in one scene or one character or individual tiny little details. This needs to be zoomed out, this intro. You don't want to get zooming in. So, for example, Shakespeare shows a problem with controlling the love test scene as Lear tries to keep control without any responsibility, and his daughters fight over what control they can get over his kingdom, which we see when they say, and goes into then analysing the love test scene. The issue I find there is it's not giving the big picture. It's just giving one thing. Sometimes people might do that with characters. I might go through each character and what they think about, in this case, control. But again, it's too zoomed in. You want to give the big picture. You want to look at the writer, and you want to look at the reader or the audience. You want to look at what's the big sense that they're getting about this issue. What's the big debate you could make? So what do you need to do? You want to zoom out, okay? You want to look at the concepts from the question, but in the text overall, across the text. What does the writer seem to be saying about this concept? And if it's been set as a question, there will be multiple things you can say and interesting things you could say, and that's what your intro needs to give a bit of a flavour of. Try and signpost the key ideas, but you don't need to commit yet. If your intro doesn't say what ultimately you're going to argue, that's fine, but you're setting out what the debate might be. I like essays that are written in a simple twist meta style, and there's a video on the YouTube channel that goes through what I mean by that and how you might plan it that way. If you've planned your essay that way, that's a really nice way then of setting up your intro, because your intro could basically go through the ideas, the simple idea, the idea where you twist it on its head, and the idea where you go a little bit more meta. As I say, there is a video that goes through that. If you like that style of writing, you can really just set those things out and summarise them as your intro. Keep the focus on the author, keep the focus on their message. The author's name should be in there at least a couple of times, and you should be giving a sense of what is their message overall. Context, a bit of a contentious one. I think context does work really well in an intro, but only if it links to your debate and the author's intention. What you don't want to do is go into a paragraph on, oh, this is what life was like in Shakespeare's England, or this is what life was like for Tennessee Williams in America. It should be there to illustrate and back up your ideas. It shouldn't be there to tell the story. And similarly, quotations. I don't mind a couple of quotations in an intro if they're there to illustrate points. If you're giving a big picture point about the text and you throw in a quotation just to show, look, this is my idea, that's fine. What you don't want to do in an intro is start analysing them and picking them apart. They're there to illustrate the zoomed out big picture, not to be analysed in a zoomed in way. So here's some good phrases that I quite like. One thing you can do in an intro is set up a straw man. What I mean by that is set up an idea that you then know that you're going to argue against. It gives you straight away a nice sense of confidence and debate. So you set out a really obvious, straightforward way of seeing the question, knowing that it's simple and you could go against it. So it's certainly tempting to suggest that whatever, or many audiences could be forgiven for believing that, or on first glance, X's point appears clear. You're setting up a quite straightforward argument, but you know that you can argue against it. What you're saying to the examiner there is, look, I know a lot of people are going to argue this, and I know why they might, but I'm probably going to go against this a bit later on. Another one is to bring context in, but naturally. Don't tell the story of the times, bring it in. So, writing for a society which largely accepted the American dream, Williams certainly presents elements of positivity in ambition by, if your questions about Streetcar. So you've set up the context to illustrate your point. Or as a Victorian novelist who made a success of gaining broad appeal, Dickens is naturally careful to present education as. So it links the context with what you want to say about the question. Going meta is quite nice. What I mean by going meta, you're talking about what the writer is saying about writing itself, or what the writer's saying about being an audience of a play. What are they saying about the experience of being in an audience, or the experience of reading a text? So, of course, McEwan shows how the reader is as guilty as brightly of wishing to believe in a fairy tale as. So, drawing parallels between the audience and what they feel and a particular character can work well. Or Keats is, of course, himself haunted by the memory of the early romantics. Again, bringing in how Keats felt about his situation as a poet with what he's saying in his poems. Similarly, you can lead on structure, you can lead on the overall picture. You can look at, does it change as the text goes across? So initially Shakespeare presents innocence as X, but clearly this shifts as the play progresses because, so you're showing how it changes as the play goes on. As Hard Times goes on, Dickens forces the audience to see imagination as a powerful antidote to society's problems so you're linking it to the overall structure. So, if your question is on dreams and reality, it's a classic essay question on Streetcar. I can't remember if it's come up before. I have a feeling that it has, but if it hasn't, it's a classic one that is quite common to come up if you study Streetcar. So, I'd avoid that. Dreams and reality can be seen in negative and positive ways. It's generic. It's not really saying anything. You don't want to do that. In 1940s America, there was a strong belief in the American dream, which meant that. Now, you should probably talk about the American dream, but if your intro is telling the story of what the American dream is, you're missing a trick. You're not really arguing anything. Lots of characters have dreams. Blanche dreams of this, Stanley dreams of this. Again, you're zooming in, you're going into individual characters. The danger of that is your essay just becomes telling the story of those characters. You want to be, remember, your intro, like your essay, is from the perspective of almost sitting over the writer's shoulder as they're writing it, or sitting in the audience, watching this and seeing how the audience are interacting. That's a perspective. You don't want to be talking about characters, like they're real. Or dreams are a problem for all characters in the play, and Williams shows that they need to accept reality throughout the play. Again, from my point of view, I'm not keen on that because I feel like it backs you into a corner. Other people may disagree, and if you like that style and it works for you, I'm not saying it's terrible. It's just not the way I would suggest to do it. That doesn't mean it's wrong. So how might you go with it? I've tried to do an illustrative introduction there of lots of different things you could do. It is a bit long. It does maybe have a bit too much detail. It's just because I'm trying to show different ways you could go with this and put them all in one. Okay, so I'm not suggesting this is necessarily the best intro ever. I'm suggesting it's hopefully illustrating different ideas that you could try. So initially, Williams confronts the audience with the seemingly inescapable idea that dreams have no place in modern day America, as Blanche's fantasies are presented as ridiculous to the audience who laugh at her, while they aspire to have the concrete achievements of Stanley, shown through the loud noise of his radio and brightness of his clothes in the poker scene. However, Williams gradually appears to confront the audience with the view that these items are simply a front, that like Blanche, modern America is also lost in the fantasy of the American dream. As such, the audience leave the play aware that Stella and Stanley's family life, supposedly integral to American society, is based on a lie, while Blanche is able to escape the horrors of a reality by creating a dream world which allows us to remain young. The audience is encouraged to choose between accepting the harsh reality of their life and seeing the world in a more elegiac way, as Williams gradually reduces the realism of his own play to make the audience question the America they've previously accepted as real, in the same way Stella has accepted Stanley's denial of the rape. So like I say, it is a bit overlong. It's because I'm trying to show lots of different ways that you could go with this, lots of different techniques that you could use. So notice, initially, Williams, so we're talking early in the play, and we're also saying initially we might feel this. So it's both leading into structure and starting to set up that straw man idea, the idea that you might then disagree with a bit later on. The seemingly inescapable idea that dreams have no place, it gives a quite simplistic, quite straightforward way of seeing this view. Dreams are bad, basically. But with the word seemingly, with initially, it gives you ground to then argue against it later on. Notice we have got characters mentioned here, Blanche and Stanley. We've got items mentioned from the play, so it's illustrating, but it's not getting into the trap of going, Blanche feels like this, Stanley feels like this. The characters are there to illustrate how the audience should be. The view of this is zoomed out, this is looking at how the audience respond. What do the audience do? They aspire to be like Stanley. So the characters are there to illustrate, not to kind of get zoomed in. However, Williams gradually, so we're focusing on the author, we're looking at the overall structure, what does he do as the play goes on. It draws that parallel between what Blanche feels and what the audience feels. So it's starting to go that little bit more meta. It's looking at how is the audience a little bit like Blanche. Well, they're both lost in a bit of a fantasy. It mentions the American dream, but to illustrate that point, not to tell the story of America in the 1940s. The audience leave the play, again, focus on this meta idea of what is Williams doing to the audience as they actually leave that theatre. How is their experience like the characters? The audience is encouraged to choose. Notice we've got that sense of debate. We've not closed it down yet, but we've got a sense of a debate that might form the basis of the rest of the audience. But it's not a debate of are dreams good or bad. It's a debate about how the audience see themselves. It's that bit more interesting. It uses a quotation, but it's to illustrate, not to analyse. And it gives the idea that the audience have previously thought one way, but actually maybe now they're challenging it. And notice across the structure of that intro, it follows that simple twist meta idea. Initially, we see dreams as a problem. We could turn that on its head and say, actually, no, dreams are sometimes more positive for Blanche, and actually the American dream is also a bit of an issue. So what we see as real is also just as much based on a dream. Then it goes meta. What's William saying to the audience? What's Williams doing in his play? What does he make his play more dreamlike by the end? So like I say, it's lots of different ideas. It's a very long intro, probably a bit too long, but I'm trying to illustrate different ways you could go, different ideas that might be effective for writing a good, solid introduction.